Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back. We've got a live shot there at the Pentagon. We're waiting to hear from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth as well as Joint Chiefs Chair Dan Kane with their updates on the attack that the United States conducted on Iran last night. And here with me for analysis on what's been going on, I'm joined by Rosemary Kelanic, who is with Defense Priorities and Middle East Program Director. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And also I'm joined by Danielle Pletka, who's with the American Enterprise Institute and is the Foreign and Defense Policy Studies Senior Fellow. Welcome to Washington Journal.
Thanks.
Now, starting with you, Danny, can I just get your reaction to those strikes last night?
Well, they were quite decisive. I think that those of us who were paying close attention had a sense this was coming, that, in fact, the diplomatic process was not leading towards a resolution of the Iranian nuclear program, and that the president made I think probably for him, a tough decision and went ahead. What was, I think, important was that we used pretty impressive firepower, and that we used it for the first time, that we took out the Fordow Nuclear Enrichment Center, which is obviously the one that was deep, deep underground. We took out Natanz. We took out the enrichment center at Isfahan. And that, I hope, begins to mitigate some of the threat from the Iranian nuclear weapons program, but also encourages them to come back to a diplomatic process with some serious goals in mind.
And Rosemary, what about you? What was your reaction when you saw the news last night?
I'm afraid to say I think that this was a terrible mistake. Let me preface this by saying I hope I'm wrong. But while, the United States military is the best in the world, they executed this flawlessly. This is ultimately not a military problem. It's a political problem. And you can't bomb a 20-year-old nuclear program out of existence with just some airstrikes. I'm worried that this is going to draw the United States into a longer war with boots on the ground, potentially a regime change war, which is not in the U.S. interest whatsoever. And I think while things look good now, in the short, after the dust settles, we're going to find out that we haven't actually gotten all the nuclear components. The Iranians have already said that they've moved materials out of these bases where we knew that they were. And they are somewhere else in the country, and we don't know where they are. So ultimately, you can't bomb yourself out of this problem. And I'm afraid that this will escalate to a broader conflict, and I sincerely hope that that does not happen.
Rose, Danny mentioned that this might help bring Iran back to the negotiating table. Do you think that that's a likelihood?
No. No, I don't think that's a likelihood. I think the problem here is that
we have... There, Rose. It looks like we're going to be having the Defense Secretary come in just a moment. We see them filing in. If you want to quickly finish your point, and then we'll turn to this press conference.
No, I think Iran would be crazy to come to the negotiating table because Iran thinks that this is a regime change war against them, right? They think this is an existential threat to them, and I don't think they're going to want to negotiate.
It looks like they're coming on stage now. Let's listen.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning. Last night, on President Trump's orders, U.S. Central Command conducted a precision strike in the middle of the night against 3 nuclear facilities in Iran, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, in order to destroy or severely degrade Iran's nuclear program. And as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs will demonstrate, it was an incredible and overwhelming success. The order we received from our commander-in-chief was focused, it was powerful, and it was clear. We devastated the Iranian nuclear program. But it's worth noting the operation did not target Iranian troops or the Iranian people. For the entirety of his time in office, President Trump has consistently stated for over 10 years that Iran must not get a nuclear weapon. Full stop. Thanks to President Trump's bold and visionary leadership and his commitment to peace through strength, Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated. Many presidents have dreamed of delivering the final blow to Iran's nuclear program, and none could until President Trump. The operation President Trump planned was bold and it was brilliant, showing the world that American deterrence is back. When this president speaks, the world should listen. And the U.S. military, we can back it up. The most powerful military the world has ever known. No other country on planet Earth could have conducted the operation that the chairman is going to outline this morning. Not even close. Just like Soleimani found out in the first term, Iran found out when POTUS says 60 days that he seeks peace and negotiation, he means 60 days of peace and negotiation. Otherwise, that nuclear program, that nuclear capability will not exist. He meant it. This is not the previous administration. The President Trump said no nukes. He seeks peace, and Iran should take that path. He sent out a truth last night saying this: any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. Signed, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Iran would be smart to heed those words. He's said it before, and he means it. I want to give recognition to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Joint Staff, General Eric Kurilla at CENTCOM, who did a phenomenal job, he and his staff, all of CENTCOM. Policy, across the board, this was a joint effort, and across the Pentagon effort. I want to recognize the pilots who flew those bombers, who flew those fighters, who flew those refuelers, warriors. I want to recognize the sailors on those destroyers, in those subs, on those carriers, warriors, all of them. I want to recognize our soldiers doing air defense, base defense, QRF, warriors, all of them. Every American involved in this operation performed flawlessly. And I want to give recognition to our allies in Israel as well. This is a plan that took months and weeks of positioning and preparation so that we could be ready when the President of the United States called. It took a great deal of precision. It involved misdirection and the highest of operational security. Our B-2s went in and out of downtown Tehran, of these nuclear sites, in and out and back without the world knowing at all. In that way, it was historic. A strike that included the longest B-2 Spirit bomber mission since 2001 and the first operational employment of the MOP, a massive ordnance penetrator. The mission demonstrated to the world the level of joint and allied integration that speak to the strength of our alliance and our joint forces. As President Trump has stated, the United States does not seek war, but let me be clear. We will act swiftly and decisively when our people, our partners, or our interests are threatened. Iran should listen to the President of the United States and know that he means it, every word. I want to give congratulations to our Commander-in-Chief. It was an honor to watch him lead last night and throughout, and to our great American warriors on this successful operation. God bless our troops. God bless America. And we give glory to God for his providence and continue to ask for his protection. I turn it over now to the chairman for specifics.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for recognizing all of our folks out there doing our nation's work, and nice to see everybody on this early Sunday morning. Last night on the President's orders, U.S. Central Command, under the command of General Eric Kurilla, executed Operation Midnight Hammer, a deliberate and precise strike against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. This was a complex and high-risk mission carried out with exceptional skill and discipline by our joint force. I want to thank every service member, planner, operator that made this mission possible. Their actions reflect the highest standards of the United States Armed Forces. This operation was designed to severely degrade Iran's nuclear weapons infrastructure. It was planned and executed across multiple domains and theaters with coordination that reflects our ability to project power globally with speed and precision at the time and place of our nation's choosing. This was a highly classified mission with very few people in Washington knowing the timing or nature of this plan. I'll refer you to the graphic on the side as I walk you through some of the operational details. At midnight Friday into Saturday morning, a large B-2 strike package comprised of bombers launched from the continental United States. As part of the plan to maintain tactical surprise, part of the package proceeded to the west and into the Pacific as a decoy, a deception effort known only to an extremely small number of planners and key leaders here in Washington and in Tampa. The main strike package, comprised of 7 B-2 Spirit bombers, each with 2 crew members, proceeded quietly to the east with minimal communications. Throughout the 18-hour flight into the target area, the aircraft completed multiple in-flight refuelings. Once over land, the B-2s linked up with escort and support aircraft in a complex, tightly timed maneuver requiring exact synchronization across multiple platforms in a narrow piece of airspace, all done with minimal communications. This type of integration is exactly what our joint force does better than anyone else in the world. At approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time last night, and just prior to the strike package entering Iran, a U.S. submarine in the Central Command Area of Responsibility launched more than 24 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles against key surface infrastructure targets at Esfahan. As the Operation Midnight Hammer strike package entered Iranian airspace, the U.S. employed several deception tactics, including decoys, as the 4th and 5th generation aircraft pushed out in front of the strike package at high altitude and high speed, sweeping in front of the package for enemy fighters and surface-to-air missile threats. The strike package was supported by U.S. Strategic Command, U.S. Transportation Command, U.S. Cyber Command, U.S. Space Command, U.S. Space Force, and U.S. European Command. As the strike package approached Fordo and Natanz, the U.S. protection package employed high-speed suppression weapons to ensure safe passage of the strike package, with fighter assets employing preemptive suppressing fires against any potential Iranian surface-to-air threats. We are currently unaware of any shots fired at the U.S. strike package on the way in. At approximately 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:10 a.m. Iran time, the lead B-2 dropped 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons on the first of several aim points at Fordo. As the President stated last night, the remaining bombers then hit their targets as well, with a total of 14 MOPs dropped against 2 nuclear target areas. All 3 Iranian nuclear infrastructure targets were struck between 6:40 p.m. and 7:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, that's about 2:10 in the morning local time in Iran, with the Tomahawk missiles being the last to strike at Esfahan to ensure we retain the element of surprise throughout the operation. Following weapons release, the Midnight Hammer strike package exited Iranian airspace and the package began its return home. We are unaware of any shots fired at the package on the way out. Iran's fighters did not fly, and it appears that Iran's surface-to-air missile systems did not see us. Throughout the mission, we retained the element of surprise. In total, U.S. forces employed approximately 75 precision-guided weapons during this operation. This included, as the President stated last night, 14 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, marking the first ever operational use of this weapon. I know that battle damage is of great interest. Final battle damage will take some time, but initial battle damage assessments indicate that all three sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. More than 125 U.S. aircraft participated in this mission, including B-2 stealth bombers, multiple flights of fourth and fifth generation fighters, dozens and dozens of air refueling tankers, a guided missile submarine, and a full array of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, as well as hundreds of maintenance and operational professionals. As the Secretary said, this was the largest B-2 operational strike in U.S. history and the second longest B-2 mission ever flown, exceeded only by those in the days following 9/11. Well prior to the strike, General Kurilla elevated force protection measures across the region, especially in Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf. Our forces remain on high alert and are fully postured to respond to any Iranian retaliation or proxy attacks, which would be an incredibly poor choice. We will defend ourselves. The safety of our service members and civilians remains our highest priority. This mission demonstrates the unmatched reach, coordination, and capability of the United States military. In just a matter of weeks, this went from strategic planning to global execution. This operation underscores the unmatched capabilities and global reach of the United States military. As the President clearly said last night, no other military in the world could have done this. I join the President and the Secretary in being incredibly proud of the air crews, naval forces, cyber operators, planners, and support teams, and commanders who made this mission possible. It is their skill, discipline, and teamwork that makes this operation possible. I am particularly proud of our discipline related to operational security, something that was of great concern to the President, the Secretary, General Kurilla, and me, and we will continue to focus on this. As we stand here this morning, many assets are still airborne, and we have hundreds deployed. I ask that we keep our warfighters on their way home and our deployed service member in our thoughts. Our joint force remains ready to defend the United States, our troops, and our interests in the region. Thank you very much.
We will take a few questions, Phil.
Me?
Yeah.
So, is regime change off the table, Mr. Secretary? And to the chairman, you said the battle damage assessment is still ongoing, but do you believe that some nuclear capability in Iran remains?
This mission was not and has not been about regime change. The President authorized a precision operation to neutralize the threats to our national interests posed by the Iranian nuclear program and the collective self-defense of our troops and our ally Israel.
Thanks for your question. I think BDA is still pending, and it would be way too early for me to comment on what may or may not still be there. But thanks for the question.
Green. No, behind you.
Excuse me, Mr. Secretary, can you tell me, was there a particular moment when the President decided to pull the trigger on this operation where he said, now, rather than being, something in the holster, now we're going to pull the trigger on it?
I would just say, having the opportunity to witness his leadership, he was fully committed to the peace process, wanted a negotiated outcome, gave Iran every single opportunity, and unfortunately was met by stonewalling, which is why he gave them plenty of time to continue to come to the table and give up enrichment, give up the nuclear program. But there was I won't say the particular moment, there was certainly a moment in time where he realized that it had to be a certain action taken in order to minimize the threat to us and our troops. Yeah.
General, you say that General Kurilla increased force protection in Iraq, Syria, and Gulf, in those areas. Were they given any advance warning the attacks were coming? And also, Mr. Secretary, When were congressional leaders notified? How long before the attacks took place?
Sir, to your first question, the risk has clearly been rising over the last few weeks in the region. Based on that and not a particular awareness of this operation, we've made smart decisions to minimize the risk to U.S. forces in the region.
So there were no advance warning?
No, sir.
In congressional...
They were notified after the planes were safely out. Well, we complied with the notification requirements of the War Powers Act.
After the attacks, they were notified?
They were immediately thereafter. Yes.
Thank you, Secretary. Two quick questions. Do you believe you completely destroyed Iranian nuclear program? And how about Iranian ballistic missiles? Your ally at Israel always saying that is biggest threat. And second question is very important. What will be your next step if Iran or militias under Iranian influence on the region attack U.S. interests or allies in the region?
And you can chime in on this too, Mr. Chairman. The battle damage assessment is ongoing, but our initial assessment, as the chairman said, is that all of our precision munitions struck where we wanted them to strike and had the desired effect. Which means especially in Fordo, which was the primary target here, we believe we achieved destruction of capabilities there. Ultimately, wherever it may be, whether it's in Iraq or Syria or bases in the Gulf, as the president said, it would be, as the chairman said, it would be a very bad idea for Iran or its proxies to attempt to attack American forces. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Regarding retaliations, Iran and North Korea are cooperating on nuclear and missile development. Do you think there is a possibility that Iran, North Korea, and the other forces, such as China, will join forces to retaliate against the United States?
Well, unfortunately, because of the policies under the previous administration, we drove those countries together, and ultimately that creates a challenging environment. For this particular operation, the focus is on Iran and Iranian nuclear capabilities. That's our focus here, is to not just say that they can't have, but President Trump has said from over 20 years, frankly, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And ultimately, he decided this is the moment, given their stonewalling, when direct military action had to be taken to prevent that from happening. Yes.
Thank you very much. General Kane, I understand OPSEC, I respect OPSEC. Can you say at all what security procedures are being taken to protect U.S. troops in Iraq and elsewhere in the Middle East? And Secretary Hegseth, as a global war on terrorism veteran, what do you say to veterans who may be concerned the U.S. is getting into another open-ended war in the Middle East over weapons of mass destruction?
Thanks, sir, for the question. I won't comment on what force protection measures are being taken in the region. What I will say is we're being proactive and not reactive, and being very thoughtful about ensuring that we do all that we can to protect our forces out there.
And I would just say, as the president has directed and made clear, this is most certainly not open-ended. It doesn't mean it limits our ability to respond. We will respond if necessary. The most powerful military in the world is postured and prepared to defend our people. But what the president gave us, as I said, was a focused, powerful, and clear mission on the destruction of Iranian nuclear capabilities. Those were the targets. That's what was struck. That's what was overwhelming. That's what was overwhelming. That's what the Iranian regime needs to understand, as the president put out last night. He wants peace. There needs to be a negotiated settlement here. We ultimately demonstrated that Iran cannot have a nuclear capability. That is a very clear mission set on this operation. Yes, hold on. Yes, right there.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Question for the Secretary and the Chairman. How was this strike coordinated with the Israelis on a strategic level, militarily, and on a tactical level? Was there any direct Israeli military participation in this operation?
Well, I would say certainly Israel had an incredible military success, especially at the beginning and ongoing, in degrading Iranian capabilities, in degrading Iranian launchers, MRBMs. It's been incredible to watch what our ally Israel has been able to do. And there certainly have been conversations. I mean, General Kurilla at CENTCOM has worked closely in the defense of Israel for many years. And part of this operation was the defense of Israel and the ongoing defense of Israel. But as it pertains to this strike, this was U.S. operated and U.S. led.
We took advantage of some of the preparatory work that's been done over the past week and a half in terms of axis of approach. I won't get into the particulars, but as the Secretary said, it was a U.S. strike. We made sure we were not in the same piece of airspace and sky. Aside from that, that was the extent of it.
We'll take a couple more. Yeah, right there.
Question to the Secretary first. Are you concerned whatsoever now about the reaction from U.S. allies given the strike, particularly those in the Gulf? And to the Chairman, if I may, I understand you don't want to speak to specific assets and force protection measures, but do you anticipate at least having to bring in any further assets from other theaters to aid in force protection over the coming days?
We certainly understand the challenges of allies in the region, and we have been respectful and in working in collaboration with them as it pertains to basing and sensitivities there. Ultimately, they've got a lot of assets and people in those locations also where American troops are co-located. So that's a consideration of ours. We've been in close consultation with them, and we appreciate the support that we have got.
Thanks for the question on sort of the global picture. And as you know, that's one of my jobs, is to look globally at the entire range of challenges. We are always carefully considering our force posture around the world and then offering options to the Secretary and to the President. I won't comment on any future things, but the American people should know that we carefully consider those moves around the world and try to modulate as needed our force structure in the region.
Absolutely. Yeah, right here.
Thank you. What communications are being sent to the Iranians right now, and is there any possibility of diplomacy now or in the coming days?
I can only confirm that there are both public and private messages being directly delivered to the Iranians in multiple channels, giving them every opportunity to come to the table. They understand precisely what the American position is, precisely what steps they can take to allow for peace, and we hope they do so. Yes.
The President may not want an open-ended conflict. The Iranians may disagree. Are you prepared for a protracted war?
Well, anything can happen in conflict, we acknowledge that, but the scope of this was intentionally limited. That's the message that we're sending. With the capabilities of the American military, nearly unlimited. So Iran, in that sense, has a choice. But we've made it very clear to them, this is nuclear sites, this is nuclear capabilities, this is the line that the President set, and we set that back. Now is the time to come forward for peace, but I think one of the takeaways from this as well is the unprecedented level of ongoing cooperation. I can't speak highly enough of the chairman and his staff and General Kurilla in CENTCOM, what they've done to look around the corner, to pre-position, to understand how an operation like this comes together. The scope and scale of what occurred last night would take the breath away of almost any American if you had an opportunity to watch it in real time. And I think Tehran is certainly calculating the reality that planes flew from the middle of America in Missouri overnight, completely undetected over 3 of their most highly sensitive sites, and we were able to destroy nuclear capabilities, and our boys in those bombers are on their way home right now. We believe that'll have a clear psychological impact on how they view the future, and we certainly hope they take the path of negotiated peace. But I could not be more proud of how this building operated, of the precision, the sensitivity, and the professionalism of the troops involved in this effort. I will take one more. We'll take one more question. Yes, right there.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Concerning the justification for these strikes, in March, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released their threat assessment, concluding, quote, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear programs he suspended in 2003, unquote. So what new intelligence does the U.S. have since then that the Iranians have changed their position on nuclear weapons? And does this new intelligence come from U.S. sources and methods, or are we getting this information from other countries?
Well, I would just simply say that the president's made it very clear. He's looked at all of this, all of the intelligence, all of the information, and come to the conclusion that the Iranian nuclear program is a threat, and was willing to take this precision operation to neutralize that threat in order to advance American national interests, reduce the Iranian nuclear program, and obviously collective self-defense of ourselves and our allies. So he looked at all of it, understood the nature of the threat, and took bold action I think the American people would expect in a commander-in-chief. That's all we've got. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do you have any of the WC-135s up to check the radioactive material?
That was Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair Dan Kane that were just speaking right now about the United States strikes on Iran last night. I'm joined here for our roundtable discussion by Danielle Pletka, with the American Enterprise Institute, as well as Rosemary Kelanic, who is with Defense Priorities. And I want to start with you, Danny, and get your reaction to what we just heard from our Pentagon officials about the strikes last night.
Well, we didn't really learn very much. Let's be honest. I think we learned that the president has finite goals, that he felt that the negotiations were not being taken seriously, that he gave Iran a deadline of 60 days to show some seriousness in those negotiations. They did not do so, and subsequently made the decision to directly address the threat posed by their nuclear enrichment and other nuclear sites.
And Rose, what were your thoughts on what we just heard from the Pentagon?
I was pleased to hear that the United States seemed to be trying to communicate to Iran that this is only a nuclear strike, that the U.S. does not want to get involved in regime change. The U.S. has not targeted Iranian troops. Unfortunately, I think the reporter who asked the question, the U.S. wants to keep this limited, but Iran may disagree, is right on there. I was also struck by Hegseth saying that, the U.S. military, its capabilities are unlimited. Certainly its talent and its effort is unlimited, but our capabilities are already stretched. We've lost 3 jets in the region to accidents alone. So, the idea that this is going to stay limited, I certainly hope that is the case. But facts on the ground suggest otherwise. And the big takeaway, I think, is that this is not going to make an Iranian nuclear weapon less likely. These strikes are going to make it more likely. More likely.
We'll be taking questions from our audience for our 2 guests. Our line for Republicans, 202-748-8001. For Democrats, 202-748-8000. And for Independents, 202-748-8002. Now, staying with you, Rose, the Defense Secretary said that these strikes were able to meaningfully degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities. What do you think of that assessment, and do we have enough information at this point to make that judgment?
We don't really know for sure yet. We don't have the battlefield damage assessment, as was mentioned in the conference. I have no doubt that we blew Fordo and Natanz and Esfahan to smithereens, but that doesn't mean that we got all of the aspects of the Iranian nuclear program, right? Iran has been working on this for 20 years. They have thousands of nuclear scientists. You can't bomb the knowledge out of their brains. It's not clear to me that we got all of the nuclear components, all of the stockpiles of uranium. The Iranians are not dumb. They probably moved those before these strikes happened. So I am not at all convinced that we have gotten rid of all of the aspects of their nuclear program that are of concern. And ultimately, the only way to do that is with boots on the ground, either IAEA inspectors, which means we have some kind of deal with Iran, right, to allow them peacefully to verify that everything has been destroyed, or what I fear most, U.S. boots on the ground to make sure that everything is destroyed. That's the only way we'll really know for sure.
We heard in that press conference that they are hopeful this will lead to Iran reassessing its stance and its negotiating position. What takeaways do you think Iran can take from these strikes in terms of what they bring back to the negotiating table if they come back at all?
So I think that the Iranians, if they were smart, and they are outstanding negotiators. I have a lot of respect for our Iranian interlocutors. I think the problem is that the mandate that they have is not to give up their nuclear weapons program. And that's the issue. This is all about delay and about tactical concessions that really don't go to the heart of the nuclear weapons program. I think another thing that people need to understand, which is let's not say boring, but let's say part of the environment that a lot of people don't get, is that the nuclear agreement that Barack Obama signed with the Iranians had a number of provisions that sunsetted, right? So controls on their missile program, controls on conventional weapon sales. This October, something called snapback expires. And that is extraordinarily important. It was the fail-safe mechanism in that deal. And what that meant was that if Iran was not in compliance, that parties to the deal could go to the Security Council, and there would be no permission for a veto by the Chinese or the Russians or anybody else, and that all international sanctions would be put back on the Iranians. That would be truly devastating to Iran, and a lot of what they're doing now is about getting past October.
But didn't we already kind of walk away from that deal?
The United States cannot trigger snapback, that's exactly right, but the decision by the British, the French, and the Germans was prior to yesterday already made, that they were going to go for snapback because Iran was not offering the necessary concessions to come back into compliance with what was called the JCPOA.
Rose, speaking of other countries, what is your assessment of the international reaction to these strikes?
I think it's too soon to tell, and I'm not an expert on how Britain and France and Germany are going to react. I mean, it certainly matters, but I would like to sort of go back to a few things that Danny said, if I may, which is referring to this as an Iranian nuclear weapons program. U.S. intelligence has been consistent for a very long time that Iran was not, in our estimate, trying to get nuclear weapons. And in fact, people have been arguing that Iran is on the verge of getting nuclear weapons for over 30 years, right? Back in 1992, a task force of the House Republican Research Committee claimed there was a 98% certainty that Iran already had all or virtually all of the components required for 2 or 3 operational nuclear weapons. In 1992, they said they already had them. They were wrong. In 1995, right, Iran might be able to build an atomic bomb in up to 5 years, Israeli and U.S. officials fear. They were wrong. Netanyahu testifies to the UN in 2012 with this picture of a bomb saying that Iran was a year away from getting nuclear weapons. He was wrong, right? Netanyahu also said that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. In 2002, he told Congress that, right? And he testified to Congress that Saddam Hussein had nuclear centrifuges the size of washing machines. So it's not at all evident that Iran had a nuclear weapons program. That's not at all evident, and I don't think that we should lose sight of that and lose sight of the fact that people have claimed that this has been on the verge of happening for over 30 years, and they were wrong every time. Now, my fear is that now it will happen, because now that we've attacked Iran, we've given them every incentive to take their nuclear knowledge and go and get a nuclear weapon to deter future attacks from the United States and Israel, right? That's what we've set in motion here. It's a terrible mistake. Terrible.
Now, this came up in the press conference itself. One of the reporters asked a question about this. Director of National Intelligence, Director Tulsi Gabbard, testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee back in March and also then minimized Iran's nuclear capabilities.
The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. The IC continues to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program.
Danny, your response to what Rose was saying about the weapons programs and that clip.
I didn't see Tulsi Gabbard there in the sit room when I looked at the pictures that the president tweeted out last night, so I'm not sure what role she's playing anymore. But look, it's important for people to understand that the way a nuclear weapons program works is that there are 2 models, fundamentally, for what we call breakout. Right? When you decide to actually load a nuclear core into a nuclear weapon or onto a delivery vehicle. There is the North Korea model, which is that they use the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and all of its clauses to get the necessary expertise. Then they break out and go boom. Right? And then there's the Japan model, which is a country that has the capability of breaking out within weeks, but has chosen not to have a weapon. Nobody in this world wants the Islamic Republic of Iran the premier state sponsor of terrorism, behind numerous wars, numerous attacks on the United States, an attempt on the life of the President of the United States, to be able to break out within weeks. If Iran did not have a nuclear weapons program, there would be no reason that they would have been concealing their program from the International Atomic Energy Agency. By the way, they're obligated to share that information. They would not have been hardening elements of their program because, in fact, they don't need those elements of their program. We have a nuclear cooperation agreement with, for example, the United Arab Emirates. They don't have enrichment. They don't have a secret cave in which they're enriching to 60%, right, which is not allowed by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran has serially refused to allow the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors into their sites. They have lied about their sites. Now, again, they may not have made a decision to have a nuclear weapon tomorrow, but that doesn't mean that they can't have a nuclear weapon within weeks if they want to. And that's what these warnings are about.
We have a lot of questions from our callers, and so let's start with Charles in Bentonville, Arkansas, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Charles.
Good morning. Let's assume that last night didn't happen, that the United States wasn't involved in preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Let's assume that Iran developed a nuclear weapon, put it on a missile, and struck Israel in a surprise attack. What do you think the aftermath of that would be?
Rose, why don't you answer first, and then Danny.
I think the aftermath of what would happen would be clear, which is that Israel has a survivable second strike nuclear capability, and they would incinerate Iran immediately. That's what would happen. And that is a powerful deterrent against Iran attacking Israel with nuclear weapons if they had them, which, as far as we know, they do not. Now, deterrence is not perfect, and I understand why Israel doesn't want Iran to get nukes. I don't want Iran to get nukes. Nobody should want Iran to get nuclear weapons, right? But I don't think that we can overlook the fact that Israel has a powerful nuclear deterrence, and that matters.
Danny?
Israel is a country of 10 million people. Iran is a country of 90 million people. The Jewish population of the world before World War II was 15 million more than it is now. We still don't have the number of Jews in the world that existed in 1939. I can understand why Israel doesn't want to test the power of its deterrence against Iran. I think there's another really important element that we don't like to talk about that much, and that is the ideological nature of the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is a regime that is ideological. They are committed, of course, first and foremost to regime security. They want to maintain their power. But after that, they have said innumerable times that they wish to destroy the state of Israel. There is no reason on earth why people should not believe them.
Michelle is in Montgomery, Alabama, on our line for Democrats. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, Kimberly. Thank you for taking my call. I don't necessarily have a question because I am listening intently. But one thing that I do want people to understand about Iran is that these are very intelligent people. And everyone is worried about a dirty nuclear bomb. But what about other weapons of mass destruction that are not nuclear that can be created? And then another point that I had is why circumvent Congress out of this? Have we lost sight of our laws, our Constitution? Are we not following those patterns? And it just seems like everyone is just okay with not going through Congress. Thank you, Kimberly.
Danny, your response?
Let's start with Congress. The requirement is that the president notify the Congress of impending hostilities. The president did so. That is the requirement of the War Powers Act. Then, presumably, if conflict continues, and that requires combat, then the president must come to Congress after 60 days and ask for a declaration of war. We are not in a situation where we are going to be in combat in 60 days, at least I hope not, and I suspect Rose agrees with me about that as well. And so those conditions are therefore met. I will say this, the history over the last few decades of the War Powers Act and of presidents going into conflict without going to Congress for quote-unquote permission is pretty clear. That happens more often than not. Barack Obama went into Libya. He did not seek the quote-unquote permission of Congress. And in fact, the Constitution doesn't suggest that Congress needs to give permission. Bill Clinton went into Kosovo. Again, we were in that conflict for well over 60 days, did not seek a declaration of war from Congress. This is a matter of conflict between the Congress and the White House, no matter what party is in control of either branch. But the idea that somehow the president needs permission is simply incorrect.
Before I get your comments on this, Rose, I want to read some responses on X from members of Congress. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said last night, the president's disastrous decision to bomb Iran without authorization is a grave violation of the Constitution and congressional war powers. He has impulsively risked launching a war that may ensnare us for generations. It is absolutely and clearly grounds for impeachment. Senator Tim Kaine said the American public is overwhelmingly opposed to the U.S. waging war on Iran, and the Israeli foreign minister admitted yesterday that Israeli bombing had set the Iranian nuclear program back at least 2 or 3 years. So what made Trump recklessly decide to rush and bomb today? Rose, your thoughts?
Yeah. So my thoughts on this are that there's a reason why the president is supposed to go to Congress before declaring war. And I agree with Danny 100%. This is a bipartisan problem, right? Like, presidents of both parties have gone to war without talking to Congress. And I would just point out that the examples that she mentioned are not particularly good examples of success, right? Libya is a failed state, in part because we bombed them, right? The reason why the United States president is supposed to talk to Congress is it's supposed to generate public debate over whether or not this is a good idea to go in. And the fact that we have not had that debate, right? And the American people, quite frankly, are extremely against this. There was a poll back in May, before all of this got politicized, right, by Brookings, that said only 14% of Americans supported a military solution to the Iran nuclear issue, right? So we went to war without debate, without weighing in, without listening to the American people. And I actually think the American people are quite wise on these issues. I think they understand what a hazard this is and how risky this is for the United States. And, you know, by bypassing Congress, right, we've done a disservice to them.
Earlier this morning, Iran's foreign minister held a press conference in Istanbul condemning the U.S. attacks as well as the Trump administration. Let's listen to a portion of those comments.
The Islamic Republic of Iran condemns in the strongest terms the United States' brutal military aggression against Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities. It is an outrageous, grave, and unprecedented violation of the fundamental principles of the Charter of the United Nations and international law. The warmongering and lawless administration in Washington is solely and fully responsible for the dangerous consequences and far-reaching implications of its act of aggression. The U.S. military attack on the territorial integrity and national sovereignty of a UN member state carried out with genocidal Israeli regime, carried out in collusion with the genocidal Israeli regime, has once again revealed the extent of the United States' hostility towards the peace-seeking people of Iran, who will never compromise over their independence and sovereignty. The Islamic Republic of Iran continues to defend Iran's territory, sovereignty, security, and people by all means necessary against not just U.S. military aggression, but also the reckless and unlawful actions of the Israeli regime. While President Trump was elected on a platform of putting an end to America's costly involvement of forever wars in our part of the world, he has betrayed not only Iran by abusing our commitment to diplomacy, but also deceived his own voters by submitting to the wishes of a wanted war criminal who has grown accustomed to exploiting the lives and wealth of American citizens to further the Israeli regime's objectives.
Back to your calls. Laura is in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, on our line for Independence. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning. So I'm just pretty much disgusted with all of it because I feel right now that the United States is no longer a diplomatic country. All we're doing now is just trying to show our military might, and I don't see how this will enhance anything towards peace in the Middle East. As a matter of fact, it looks like it's going to make everything much more worse and probably drag us into a longer war with Iran. And I don't understand how Netanyahu can get away with everything that he's been doing. And even the United Nations has said and condemned everything that's been going on in Gaza. And the United States just seems to back up all of his horrible, moves and motives. And it just doesn't seem like it's going anywhere but bad. And yet we have a government here in the United States that's trying to cut, billions of dollars of health insurance for the poor, while they want to spend trillions of dollars in foreign countries that obviously Israel can fight its own war because it has all the military might of the United States weapons. So I definitely think Rosemary, your person there, is much more measured in her thought. I think the other woman, Danielle, is much more pro-war, and that's sad. And I just think that this is not going to get us anywhere with no diplomacy. And now the United States seems
Laura,
to
I want to
have
give our
blown that
guests
up.
a chance to respond. Danny, I'll start with you. What does a diplomatic solution look like here?
A diplomatic solution looks like Iran coming to the table, disclosing as it is required, its treaty obligations under the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, disclosing all of its nuclear weapons work, all of its enrichment work, all of its weaponization and miniaturization research. It requires that Iran come clean. Coming clean will then lead to monitoring and a better understanding of Iran's nuclear weapons program. The problem with diplomacy is that if diplomacy is not backed up by the threat of force with an interlocutor like Iran, they will continue with their program. And that is why we have been negotiating with the Iranians on and off over a variety of issues for more than 20 years. I haven't noticed that it has had an enormous effect on their program. They have advanced, as Rose noted, they have advanced from where they were not just 20, but 25 and 30 years ago to a point now where they have enough enriched uranium per the International Atomic Energy Agency for 10 nuclear weapons enriched to a level of 60%. The permitted level is 3.67%. So again, diplomacy is great as long as you can achieve your goals. But diplomacy, just like war, is a tool. It is not an end in and of itself.
Rosemary?
Iran was at the table. Iran was going to have another round of negotiations on the Sunday, Father's Day, after Israel struck, right? The problem here isn't that we have to make these credible threats of force. Our threats of force are credible. What's not credible is our assurances that we won't attack them anyway, right? There are IAEA inspectors on the ground in Iran right now, right? They're there right now. And the problem is that no matter what, and Iran has not done itself any favors, right? Iran screwed this up immensely, right? But it's like, it doesn't matter what Iran does. It doesn't matter if they let in inspectors. People just are not going to believe them, and they're attacking them anyway. Like, if you're engaged in coercive diplomacy, right? It's kind of like if you're trying to get someone's wallet and you're a mugger, right? You point a gun at them and you say, give me your wallet or else I'll shoot, right? That's something Trump has been very good at doing. But there also has to be the promise. If you give me your wallet, I'm not going to shoot you anyway, right? And that's the promise that is completely non-credible now. That's the assurance problem that the U.S. has not tended to. Iran thinks that we're going to go in anyway. So why are they going to keep negotiating with us after we've done this. I mean, it's just madness.
Let's hear from Martin in Louisville, Kentucky, on our line for Democrats.
Good morning. Good morning. Yes, I just want to make a couple of points. Trump, after he became president, held a press conference with Netanyahu and said he is negotiating an end to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And for a few weeks, prisoners were exchanged. Then both sides accused each other of violating the agreement, and today the violence is even worse. He did the same thing with Russia-Ukraine. He announced that he was negotiating an end to it, and now the violence is even worse. So now the American Air Force is bombing these targets in Iraq that they say are a threat to us. And it reminds me of back in the 1950s and 60s when the American government told us that communism is a disease, and anywhere it starts, our army has to go put a stop to it or it will spread here. It was a sickening idea. The United States has never benefited from fighting the Vietnam War. Okay, so they're bombing these targets in Iraq, in Iran, but what is the result going to be? Is it going to bring about peace like they say they want, or is it going to make everything worse? So I want to see what the result is. The bottom line is they're not involving the American people in any more than they want to be. We don't have a draft today. The price of oil is not going through the roof like we would have done 50 years ago. So I want to see how long the American people will, are going to tolerate all these military operations. Thank you.
Rosemary, do you want to respond to this idea of how the American people might be responding to this?
I mean, I think the American people are patriotic and they stand behind the U.S. military, and they're probably very proud of what the U.S. military can accomplish. But I do also think that they understand that there is more to getting a political outcome than just bombing people alone, right? It was quite clear before this conflict started that the American people did not want another war in the Middle East. We know how this story ends. In fact, it doesn't end. That's the problem, right? We still have forces in Iraq. I think that this is only going to make the situation worse because, frankly, Iran is backed into a corner. It's going to be very difficult for them not to retaliate. I mean, if someone attacks you and you don't retaliate, then they're just going to keep attacking you forever, right? Iran is going to retaliate in some way, probably against U.S. forces in the region. And then what happens, right? Once American forces are injured or killed, and I certainly hope that doesn't happen, but it's a possibility, right? Then this is just going to escalate out of control.
This is a Economist YouGov poll from earlier this month asking about American support for the U.S. military getting involved in the conflict between Israel and Iran, finding that just 16% of U.S. citizens support in U.S. military involvement in this conflict, 60% saying no. If you break that down by party ID, Democrats are 65% opposed to U.S. military involvement in this conflict. Independents, 61% opposed. Republicans, 53% opposed. Danny, given this lack of support for effectively what just happened, what do you think is the path forward?
So, first of all, it's important to understand the answer to a different question in a poll, which is it okay if Iran gets nuclear weapons? The American people are up around 80% on no. And the determination that the President of the United States made is that Iran was on a path to nuclear weapons, that they were not going to negotiate their way away, and therefore this required a military response. Now, we have a really, really good way of dealing with this problem democratically in the United States. We have elections. Right? Again, I can find a poll to support me. You can find a poll to support a different point of view. That's not the right way to talk about this. The right way to talk about it is if you have a president that makes a decision and the American people don't agree, then the American people can do something about it. Next year, the American people will be able to elect new members of Congress. Let's see what they do about it. But I think it's important to understand, and Rose mentioned a little bit before, a very cute analogy, which is, if you are confronted by a mugger and you give them your wallet and they then shoot you, what's your assurance that they don't shoot you? The problem with Iran is they've never given us our wallet. Again, were there IAEA inspectors on the ground? Well, no. Actually, the IAEA, for the first time in 20 years, last Friday, censured Iran for non-cooperation, listed a number of sites where they had found evidence of nuclear weapons research and nuclear enrichment where they had not been given access. So the answer is not that inspectors were there and everything was going peachy. What we were in the midst of was dialogue. The problem is, again, dialogue has to lead somewhere. I am all for talking to the Iranians. I think the right answer to all of these things is not a quote-unquote military solution. The right answer is absolutely a diplomatic solution, but you need to get to that solution at some point. It can't be an endless process.
Michael is in Kearney, Missouri, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Michael. Michael, are you there? All right, then let's go to Gary in Moorfield, West Virginia, on our line for Democrats. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning. My question is, why did they have to go in and bomb in Iran, and they haven't done anything at all to North Korea? I mean, they're the ones that have had and do have the capability and ICBMs. I mean, they've been dropping them all over the place. And you think he's sitting by waiting? He's sitting by just biding his time there in North Korea. You know, he's getting nuclear subs so that they can ship them rascals out into the Pacific and hit any place in the U.S. And, you know, everybody says what Iran does. I've got very, very good friends, almost a son in Iran. And I'll tell you what, you know, those are the people I worry about. Ayatollah and them, I could care less.
So, Gary, you raised an interesting question about North Korea. Rose, do you want to respond first, and then Danny?
Yeah, so I mean, there's no question that North Korea is a larger threat to the United States than Iran. Iran doesn't have missiles that can hit the United States, right? They don't have missiles that are anywhere near capable of doing that, right? But the reason why the United States hasn't gone into North Korea is because North Korea already has nuclear weapons, and they have successfully deterred us from getting involved. And this whole incident, right, everything from North Korea to what's happened in Iran now, is sending the message loud and clear. If you don't want to be attacked by the United States, don't bother with all this IAEA crap. Right? I don't, this is the message we're saying. Don't bother with all this. Get nuclear weapons, right? Go get nuclear weapons to make yourself secure. This is going to have ramifications for nuclear proliferation all over the world, and bad ramifications.
Danny?
Right? Iran doesn't have to have anybody come and inspect. They do it because they're part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
So, Rose is exactly right. I think the problem is that this ship has already sailed. Right? The answer is clear. If you want to be immune to outside interference, you get a nuclear weapon. That's why Russia is in Ukraine right now, because Ukraine gave up its nuclear capabilities. That's why after Libya gave up its nuclear capabilities, NATO and with the United States behind it, the Obama administration was willing to go in. That lesson didn't need to be learned yesterday. That lesson was learned long ago. And the reason we don't deal with North Korea's nuclear threat is exactly as Rose suggested, because they have nuclear weapons. If somebody had dropped a massive ordnance penetrator on North Korea at a propitious moment, perhaps they wouldn't have nuclear weapons right now, and we wouldn't be threatened in the Pacific. They, too, at the time, didn't have missiles that reached the United States. They sure do now, and guess who they cooperate with? That's right, the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Russell is in Augusta, Georgia, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Russell.
Yes. During the 8 years that Obama was president, he dropped thousands of bombs, at least 46 to 64,000, on 7 countries. Congress knew nothing about it. So these Democrats that are complaining about Congress not knowing, it was strictly for security reasons that as few as possible know about it. And I just wish these Democrats would consider what Obama did and approve of what Trump did. Thank you, ma'am.
Rose, what do you think of Russell's comparison there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Democrats are losing the thread here, right? I don't think this is a partisan issue, right? Presidents of both parties have done this and have bombed countries without getting permission from Congress. It doesn't mean it's a good thing to do, right? And even when you get permission from Congress, right, it doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes. But at least George W. Bush in 2003 spent the time to go to Congress and get the authorization, right? And I do think that there is something to be said for having people on the record voting either in favor of a war or against a war, right? Nobody in Congress has had to go on the record about this. And all of the people who voted for the war in Iraq in 2003, that came back to haunt them. Those were consequences electorally. And I think that our current Congress members should be faced with that same consequence. I think they should have to go on the record.
What do you think?
So I'm not at all averse to the idea that Congress be accountable. I think that you're absolutely right. And this is the way that they have their cake and eat it too. They complain. And I mean, I worked for 10 years at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They complain, but at the same time, they don't really want the responsibility because then, of course, they can, as you rightly note, be blamed. On the other hand, and I'll say this is hugely important to understand, the reason that Congress supported President George W. Bush on Afghanistan and on Iraq was because of 9/11. I do not want us to have to suffer a terrible, terrible attack that takes thousands of innocent lives in order for there to be consensus between the White House and Congress. And this is why I think it's vitally important that we deal with threats before they become fatal to the American people, as opposed to after events like 9/11, Pearl Harbor, other things.
Julius is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on our line for independence. Good morning, Julius.
Yes, I think the guests were just talking about accountability, and I think the think tanks that come on here and lie about the lies of AIPAC, about the lies of the billionaire class.
What specific lies are you referencing, Julius?
Accountable, specifically like leading up to the Iraq War, the march there, the WMDs. It was lie after lie. The CIA brought in somebody named Chalabi. It was lie, 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 lie. That's all I see in the media today. I don't see them talking about Iran having allies such as Russia, China, North Korea, and that a war there could get these other world powers involved and result in a nuclear event. It is not safe to attack Iran. There is nobody credible with any common sense that's going to attack Iran, especially when you're doing peace negotiations. Their negotiator that was going to Switzerland, Geneva, Israel actually tried to assassinate him on the way. They assassinated the Hamas negotiator for peace as well. Israel does not want peace. Israel is a theocracy. It's an apartheid state. It's a racist, genocidal state.
So, Julius, I want to get our guests to respond to your question about the likelihood of other countries getting involved. Danny, how likely do you think it is that there is that spillover effect that Julius was talking about?
Well, I think that the Iranians would love for there to be a spillover effect. What we've looked at is that the Russians have been rhetorically supportive and not supportive in any other way. The Chinese have been rhetorically supportive and not supportive in any other way. Ditto for North Korea. And that, I think, is part of the problem of membership in the axis of evil is that you're not really in an axis. You're kind of in a talking shop. They'll share nuclear technology. They'll share missile technology. They'll give the kind of weaponry that they might need in the future. But when push comes to shove in a situation like we saw yesterday, the Russians are going to sit by the sidelines, as are the Chinese, as are the North Koreans. I think the odds of a wider war involving these countries is precisely zero. And all we need to do is look at, A, what they did, and look at Russia's performance in Ukraine. They can't defeat Ukraine, and they're going to take us on.
Rosemary, what's your assessment of the risk of any kind of other countries getting involved?
Well, I completely agree with Danny. I don't think any of these countries are going to get involved. They have no incentive to do so. Russia has its hands full with Ukraine, 100%. I don't think they're going to get involved. But I do think that Iran itself can cause enough problems for the United States that this can be extremely costly and difficult for us just dealing with Iran.
We have a question we received via text from Craig in Findlay, Ohio, who says, there are two uses for nuclear energy, production of electricity and weapons. Over the last 30 years, how much of Iran's energy production has come from nuclear energy? I'll start with you, Rose. Do you happen to know the answer to that question?
I don't know the exact amount, but it is something very small. It is something very small. The Iranian government is not particularly efficient with any of this. They're trying to have more energy production from nuclear energy, and that makes sense to them. Like, they are an oil exporting country. They want to export as much oil as possible and get their own domestic energy from other sources, right? But there are, I mean, just for the record, there are other things you can do with nuclear energy. I mean, you can use it for medical isotopes and all these other sorts of things. But Iran hasn't done it because they're just not very good at building nuclear plants and putting them into production.
The Russians built a nuclear plant for the Iranians in the late 1990s that is not supplying electricity to Iran. Iran's nuclear program isn't about electricity, and unfortunately it's not about medical research either. You don't need enough uranium that is produced by Fordow I mean, I would love to think that the Iranians are bringing their scientific know-how to advanced nuclear medical research, and there may be some tiny, tiny corner, but that's not what this is about. They're not using it for energy. It's not a peaceful nuclear program, and they cannot point to any success with their peaceful nuclear program over the 20-plus years of its existence.
All right, let's go to Dave. Sure, go ahead, Rose.
May I just respond to that quickly? I mean, I agree with that they're not doing this for the medical research, right? 100%. But the point is, Iran figured out how to enrich uranium many years ago, and they could have been enriching it to weapons-grade uranium all along, and they have not, right? Once you enrich to 20%, you basically figured it out well enough that you could enrich to 90%. 90% is what you need for a bomb. That's not what they've done. But of course, they've gone beyond the 3.67%. They've gone beyond 20%. They've gone to 60%. And why 60% is so important is that there is no civilian use for it, but there's also no weapons use for it, right? This is Iran taking an extremely risky gamble that totally backfired against them. But they're basically saying, hey, international community, we can go to 90. We don't want to. Please lift sanctions on us that have crippled us for 40 years, right? It doesn't mean that they have an intent to go to 90 when they've been able to go to 90 for many years and haven't.
Let's get to a couple more questions. David in Ohio on our line for Republicans. Good morning, David.
Hey, how you doing? So basically, I'm a veteran, and this is needed to happen for the past 20 years. Democrat, Republican. If a Democrat would have done this, the Democrats would have been okay. Because Donald Trump done this, he's the devil. I got 5 TVs. I'm looking at all the news. They're already talking about impeachment. This needed to be done for years. The time was talk was over. We can only talk so much about stuff. Sooner or later, you have to act. And I'm so glad that he acted. We're in a new world today. I think a lot of people in the Middle East have woken up with a sigh of relief today that they don't have a nuclear weapon or won't have one. They're done. So, thank you for listening to me, and you have a good day.
Probably a good place for us to get your final comments. Danny, you first?
So we haven't talked a lot about the region, and what David said is exactly right. Everybody in the region is to use the expression again, having their cake and eating it too, issuing pro forma denunciations and calling for the importance of de-escalation and dialogue, and meanwhile popping champagne all over foreign ministries and presidential houses and palaces, because, of course, Iran is in the region. Sure, Iran threatens us, they threaten our allies, they threaten our forces. There's no question that Iran represents a threat to us, but these are Iran's neighbors. And Iran has been trying to destabilize, has been committing terrorist attacks, and has, wherever it can, over the last 4.5 decades, has been seeking to dominate the region. And there is no doubt in my mind that there are celebrations, quiet celebrations, going on all over the region right now.
Final comments from you, Rose.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, yeah, they're having their cake and eating it too, 100%. But I don't think that they will be celebrating this behind closed doors, because I think that they understand that by striking Iran, you've given Iran every incentive to now try to go and get a nuclear weapon, to rebuild the facilities that they had, to take the nuclear scientists that they have trained and go and try again. And that means that this could turn into an endless conflict, literally an endless conflict involving the United States. I would also say that I am very worried about U.S. troops in the region, particularly troops in Syria and Iraq. We have 40,000 troops in the Middle East. Some of them are in hardened bases like in Kuwait and Bahrain. But the guys in Iraq and Syria are super exposed to Iranian retaliation, super exposed. There are victims of mission creep from the war against ISIS 10 years ago, right? We need to get those guys out. They're not in a safe place, and there's no reason for them to be there.
Well, thank you so much. That's Middle East Program Director at Defense Priorities, Rosemary Kelanic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And from the American Enterprise Institute, Danielle Pletka, thank you so much for your time and expertise this morning.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you to everyone who called in this hour. Coming up, we are going to be taking more of your comments about the U.S. entering the conflict between Israel and Iran. Our phone lines again for Republicans, 202-748-8001. For Democrats,